When the first snow fell that winter in northern Michigan, the roads looked like paper torn right out of the sky. He was stuck at a gas station off US 31 with a coffee that tasted like burnt almonds, a coat he hadn't worn since he left Duluth, and a promise he had sworn not to break. He was moving east, away from the life where his father's voice still lived in the doorframes, where every tool in the garage had a memory, where every Sunday felt like a room you weren't allowed to enter anymore. He told himself the drive was about work, new branch opening, better pay, a chance to live where the lake smells faintly of iron and not regret, but the truth was simpler. It felt easier to start again somewhere he didn't know the names of the birds. The station door opened and a blast of wind shoved in a girl with a wool scarf as big as a small blanket. She set 2 paper sacks on the counter, tapped her mitten against the price checker, and muttered that the scanner hated her. He laughed without meaning to. She looked up, and for a second the whole station hummed like a tuned string. Her eyes were the color of those low, faithful winter afternoons. "You heading south or north?" she asked. He said east, toward Traverse City, maybe beyond. She nodded, that practical nod people wear in hard towns. The clerk said the scanner was frozen, you had to type the numbers by hand. She rolled her eyes and said, "Of course," then turned to him. "You look like someone who could use a real coffee." It was a sentence that sounded like a door swinging open. He said yes. She poured from a thermos she'd brought for the volunteers at the community hall. He took a sip and felt the heat move through him like a mercy. Her name was Mara, short for Maribel, but her mother only used the full thing when they were fighting. She taught music at the elementary school 2 towns over and kept a cabin near a cedar bog because city noise made her think too much about things she couldn't fix. She had a laugh that sounded like something being set down gently. When she asked his name, he said he was Ezra, and watched her mouth test it as if the sound might break. They talked until the station lights flickered and the clerk asked if they were stranded. "Maybe," Mara said, but in a good way. She told him about the winter concert she was rehearsing without enough clarinets, about a kid who kept missing the beat but brought every rehearsal donuts his older sister made. He told her about spreadsheets and supply chains and how it felt to be good at something that nobody saw. She said being unseen could be a kind of relief. Sometimes it's easier to carry the song when nobody is grading you. He wanted to ask what song she carried. He wanted to ask why she kept staring at the storm like it owed her an answer. Instead, he said his car would hate this road after dark. She said there was a guest room at her cabin if he didn't mind wood smoke and pancakes that only turned out right every other Saturday. The invitation landed between them like a dare. It also felt like the most natural thing in the world. The cabin looked like it had stood there 100 years, shouldering seasons, keeping a kind of private weather inside. He put his bag in the spare room while she coaxed a fire awake. Snow kept throwing itself against the windows, and the pines leaned in, listening. Mara made soup that tasted like the winter version of forgiveness. They talked the way you do when you think time is elastic, about fathers who taught them to fix hinges but not how to close a conversation, about a blue bicycle she'd once ridden all the way to the county line to prove a point to nobody, about the way grief makes every chair in a house look occupied. He almost said he had a fiancé once who left a note on the fridge that said, "You're good, but I need a life that expands," in handwriting that looked like a bird trying to lift off. He almost said his father had a heart that kept skipping steps until the last stair, that afterward the house sounded like a radio between stations. He didn't say any of this. He listened instead. She told him she never learned to sleep through thunder. He told her that thunder in winter is a kind of miracle. They listened for it, as if the storm might agree. When they ran out of things to say and discovered there were still things to say, he brought in wood. She tuned an old guitar with a crack down the side. She played a minor key lullaby he didn't recognize, and the notes lifted like breath on glass. He asked where it came from. She smiled into the sound and said, "My mother wrote it once, when I was little and sick for a long time." He waited for the rest. She didn't add it, but her hands did. One wrong chord, a wince, then stubborn beauty pushing through anyway. The power went out just before midnight, and the cabin became a single candle's kingdom. They slept in rooms with doors half open like a truce. In the morning, the world was a white page. He planned to leave, said it out loud, even put on his gloves. Her dog, a slow old shepherd with one ear that never learned obedience, stood in the doorway and sighed. Ezra took off his gloves. He stayed one more day, then another, and by Friday he knew the sound of her footstep from the kitchen, the way she folded dish towels as if they would be examined in some gentler court. He helped at school, carrying timpani from the storage closet, bribed by the children's earnestness and the cocoa they insisted was medicinal. He discovered that Mara collected broken things: a chipped cup, a wind-up bird that no longer sang, a piano with a silent key she called our little secret. Why broken? He asked one night. Because they try anyway, she said, and then, softly, I understand them. He did not press. Some people are a locked door with the key under the mat. With her, it felt like the key was in his hand, but he wasn't sure he had the right to turn it. The night of the concert, the town filled the gym with coats that smelled of cold and wool and the particular anxiety of parents in metal chairs. Mara conducted like someone explaining a story only she could see. When the offbeat kid got lost in the second movement, she caught his eye and tapped as if tapping the side of a sleepy world. He found his place. The applause went on too long in that sweet small town way. Afterward, she hugged Ezra in the hallway where the trophy case reflected them back in 100 cheap mirrors. She pressed her face against his coat and said, I don't know why it feels like I've been waiting for you. He said the truth carefully, as if it might frighten. Maybe because I've been on my way for a long time. She kissed him that night in the doorway, where the snow held its breath and even the old shepherd pretended not to watch. The kiss wasn't fireworks. It was a room where someone had left the light on for you. Spring came like a rumor you wanted to believe. They built a routine small enough to hold in 2 hands. He commuted 3 days a week, learning the angles of a new office that smelled like carpet and the future. She taught scales, rehearsed choirs, and on Fridays left oranges in the mailbox of the neighbor whose wife was fighting the kind of disease that bullies even brave people. They ate dinner late and listened to the local station where the announcer mispronounced composers with a kind of confident cheer. They bought a second pillow for the couch because somehow neither of them could watch movies without falling asleep halfway through. When he asked about the old lullaby, again, she told him the part she had sealed away. The winter she turned 11, her heart had gone thin and strange, the valves like doors swelling in summer, not closing all the way. The doctors said the words careful people say when the truth is a cliff. Her mother had written that song to keep the night from getting ideas. I got better enough, Mara said, or learned how to live around it. It's nothing now. I just keep my promises with sleep, food, the boring saints. He heard the joke, the guard just underneath. Nothing, had a shadow. He asked what her dream was, not the tidy version for strangers. She surprised him by saying, October in Maine, a porch with 2 rocking chairs, and a laundry line with ridiculous socks. He said his was, a house where we can leave a mess without apologizing. They decided these were the same dream wearing different jackets. They saved money in a jar shaped like a lighthouse. They argued once about the right amount of salt in food and laughed so hard midway that they forgot to take a side. In June he found his father's old hammer in his trunk, buried under road maps like a fossil of a man who spoke in instructions. He brought it inside as if introducing a relative. Mara held it like a person holds a word that's both noun and verb. That night, she woke gasping, her hand flat to her chest as if petitioning. He sat up so fast the world smeared. She said, sometimes my heart drums too hard, and tried to smile. He counted the beats against his palm the way his father once checked for studs in a wall. The tremor slowed. She apologized to him, to the dog, to the night for scaring it. In the morning, she said it was nothing again, then called her doctor and made an appointment and did not invite him. He did not push. Love, He was learning, was most work when it looked like permission. A week later she came back with a folder of papers and a face you wear when holding a ballroom of thoughts. She said the words, "It's back, monitor, medicine, we'll manage," and then the one that lifted like a smoke signal, "Don't make this your job." He promised. He kept the promise badly because promises like that are gravity, you're already falling before you've said yes. He told his boss he needed to work remotely more often. His boss said he admired Ezra's loyalty. Ezra was not sure that's what this was. It felt less noble, more like he'd been given a miracle and asked not to blink. Summer softened around them. He built a ramp for the neighbor's wife, using the hammer, learning a silence he could trust. Mara recorded lullabies for the children who had moved away in divorce storms. On a blue day in August, the dog didn't wake. They buried him under the cedar where squirrels kept their secret meetings. Ezra carved the name, Scout, into an old plank and cried more than for certain humans. Grief came politely and then refused to leave. They let it have a chair. In September, they drove east to see the ocean because the jar had enough for gas, because sometimes you buy a day as if it were a very small house. They ate fries so hot they had to swear, watched a storm arrive with a silver spine, and wrote their names at the bottom of the map of the world with a stick, where water kept trying to teach the sand about erasure. She kissed him in the spray and said, "We're not a tragedy." He said, "No, we're two people who buy extra napkins." She laughed and carried the sound all the way home. But the winter after that, the monitor beeped too often, and the medicine changed from a nuisance to a sermon. She grew paler in ways you could only see if you had memorized her. The school district hired a substitute for a while who clapped on the 1 and 3, and Mara pretended not to take it personally. Ezra noticed she was, sometimes too tired to play her mother's lullaby, and when she did, she paused before the hard chord, and something inside him tore imperceptibly, like a book's binding starting to go. He never told her about the job offer in Chicago, the kind with numbers that make bad decisions look smart. He didn't want to be a person who measured love against digits. He deleted the email and felt good and a little bit foolish, a combination that tasted like adulthood. One night snow returned, shouldering the pines again, and she stood by the door with her coat on, hands in pockets, eyes elsewhere. He asked what she was seeing. She said, "The life where none of this is borrowed." He said, "We're paying for it, every day." That's not the same as borrowing. She leaned her head on the doorframe until the wood gave her a small red mark. "I want you to have a life that expands," she whispered, repeating the old fiancé's sentence without knowing it. He felt the past and present shake hands in his ribs. "This is expansion," he said. "It hurts, so it's real." She laughed in the soft, exhausted way of people who have stopped pretending. He held her in the night and the snow and the notion that if he held all of it long enough, something would learn how to stay. But staying isn't a lesson, it's a luck you don't get to choose. March came late and mean. The doctor said a valve had torn more, a phrase that sounded like a dress caught on a nail. Surgery was scheduled for a Thursday where nobody had planned anything else because the calendar knew its place. The night before, they made a list of practical things because love is practical when the world is not. She told him the passwords that were really song titles, the neighbor's dog's secret preference for carrots, the location of a shoebox of photographs that included every haircut mistake she'd ever made so the future wouldn't lie. He told her that if the house ever felt too quiet, he would leave the radio on low not to fool anyone but to remind himself that air can carry kindness. She rolled her eyes and said she'd be home before the milk expired. He pretended to believe it easily, because courage sometimes looks like excellent acting. The drive to the hospital was short enough to keep them honest. In the parking garage, they held hands as if their fingers had known each other longer than the rest of them. The surgical floor was painted the color of good intentions. They signed things. The nurse had forearms like a farmer and a calm that felt borrowed from someone's grandmother. She tucked warm blankets around Mara and said she'd be back with the good socks. Ezra kissed her forehead and tasted saline in the memory of oranges. When they rolled her away, she lifted her hand and shaped "I love you" with the smallest motion, as if the words might break if too large. He sat in a waiting room where books went to retire and stared at a painting of a sailboat where all the wind was somewhere else. Hours collect differently in hospitals, they have elbows. He called nobody. He watched weather crawl across the windows and imagined that if he focused hard enough on the snowflakes he could move them with his breath. A chaplain offered water and a prayer with no demands. He said yes to both. The surgeon came out with eyes that had learned too much about what hands can't do. She said the tear was worse than expected. She said they tried longer than was wise because some people make you greedy for miracles. She said they were very, very sorry. It was a sentence that pressed him down into the chair as if gravity had just remembered him. He nodded the way you nod when someone you love is being discussed in the wrong tense. He thanked the surgeon for failing extravagantly. He walked to the bathroom, locked the door, and sat on the closed lid, and the sound he made was private and animal in short because there was still paperwork, still a world that believes in signatures. After, he drove home on roads that pretended to be familiar. The cabin looked like it had forgotten its own instructions. He opened the door and the old shepherd was not there to sigh, grief reused that chair. He turned on the radio to the low hum she liked, and it felt like flipping a coin that lands on its side. In the bedroom, he found the shoebox she had promised, photographs of haircuts that could file lawsuits, ticket stubs, a napkin with the words, "We are buying extra napkins," written in his handwriting. Under it all, an envelope with his name. The letter was written in pencil, the kind that smudges because it wants to keep touching you. She told him the truth he had already seen coming like weather on an honest horizon. She had known for longer than she said that her heart was making different plans. She had loved him with all the rooms she had, even the ones with bad lighting. She asked him to keep the hammer, to keep the radio low, to keep buying oranges for strangers and listening for the wrong chord in every song because that's where the ache lives and therefore the beauty. She wrote that if he ever made it to Maine in October, he should sit on a porch and rock for both of them and hang ridiculous socks on a line where the wind could laugh. She asked him to forgive her for the times she called their life borrowed. She understood now that borrowed and shared were cousins that often wore each other's sweaters. She told him to expand. The letter ended with the lullaby in her mother's broken notation, the chord he could never quite anticipate. He placed the paper on the piano and tried it slowly, the way you step onto ice you want to trust. The wrong note glowed like a wound. He played it again and realized that the wrongness was the point. The chord wanted to lean, to yearn, to move. He played it a third time and let it lean. The house listened. The snow outside softened, as if someone had used a finger to blur the edges of the world. Days passed like careful footsteps. He answered casseroles at the door and wore his coat like a necessary lie. He went back to the school and fixed a wobbly music stand and found the offbeat kid sitting in the corner with a clarinet case he was afraid to open. Ezra sat on the floor with him and told a story about a conductor who could tap the world back into place. The boy opened the case. The first note hurt and helped. In April, Ezra took the job in Chicago because the letter said expand and he wanted to obey the living version of her words. He kept the cabin, though, and drove north on the first Friday of every month, as if the road were a string connecting him to the place where belief still had furniture. He sanded the porch, learned to replace the gasket on the finicky faucet, and once, in July, found a feather lodged under the eave and kept it in a jar as if it were a sentence. He bought a cheap rocking chair and a second one nobody sat in, the way you save a seat for luck. In October that year, he drove further, all the way to Maine. The map said it was a long way, grief said it was just across the hall. He rented a small cottage with a porch and hung ridiculous socks on a line and sat until the light went the color of quiet peaches. He played the lullaby on a travel guitar that didn't deserve the song and let the wrong chord lean. The wind rocked the second chair as if someone had once been there and had just stepped inside to get the sugar. He whispered the words he never got to say enough, thank you, stay, forgive me, stay, I love you, stay, and watched the ocean teach the shore, again and again, about the art of holding what is always leaving. He went home with sand in his shoes and the stubborn feeling that love, even broken, was still an instrument. That winter, he started bringing coffee to the gas station volunteers when storms came. He watched for strangers stranded in the kind of weather that rights people toward each other. Sometimes someone would laugh at a scanner or ask if he was heading east or west. He learned to pour coffee with a hand that didn't shake much anymore. He learned to listen for the wrong chord in everyone he met. He didn't fix it, he let it lean. And on nights when the power went out and the cabin became a small kingdom again, he lit a candle and left the bedroom door half open, as if someone were walking down the hall humming a song that made the dark behave.